My name is Paula Wilson. I'm Director of Customer Contact at Accent Housing, and more importantly today, a board member at Wish. So I'd like to welcome you all to join us for our latest event in our health series, where today we're talking about pregnancy loss and fertility journeys. We recognise that this is a very emotive subject, and there will be some elements of the conversation, whether you're trying to conceive or have lost a pregnancy, that might trigger feelings that you find quite distressing. We do normally love to see you on camera, but there's absolutely no pressure for you to be on camera today. And if you feel like you need to leave at any point, then that's okay as well. As with all Wish events, we want you to know that this is a safe and inclusive space, and we welcome your participation. So please use the chat, raise your hand if you've got any questions throughout this. We've got some remarkable speakers joining us on today's agenda. We have Ruth Bender-Ateek, National Director at the Miscarriage Association. We've got Shelley Williams join us, who's an associate at Womble Bond Dickinson. And we've also got Charlotte Murray, who's Co-Director of Health and Wellbeing at South Yorkshire Housing. So as we've said, we're recording a session. There are some members who can't attend in person today, so we will share that afterwards. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ruth.
Thanks, Paula. Hello, everybody. Of course, as soon as I start speaking, I get the proverbial frog in my throat, so I apologize for that. As Paula said, this is not an easy topic to talk about, and in many ways, that's precisely why I know that you've decided to talk about it today. I think it can be really, really helpful to be a bit more open about stuff that's difficult for us and troubling for us. So I thought it might be useful just to start off by kind of painting the background picture when we're talking about pregnancy loss and fertility or infertility with a few facts and figures. So these are some of the things that just, you may already know, but miscarriage in this country anyway is defined as the natural or spontaneous loss or death of a baby or pregnancy before 24 weeks gestation. I think a lot of people think miscarriage is sort of something that happens in the first 12 weeks, but it can go on, it can happen much later in pregnancy. It's very, very horribly common. Around 1 in 4 pregnancies ends that way. And most of them do actually happen in the first 12 or 13 weeks. 2% of them happen somewhere between 14 weeks and just before 24 weeks. So that might seem like a really small number, but actually when you think about the number of people who are having miscarriages, it's still a lot of people, it's still a lot of losses, and it's still a very upsetting situation. So most people who miscarry once, but quite a lot of people have more than one miscarriage, and that might be with a mix of healthy pregnancies and miscarriages. Around 1 in 100 couples who are trying to get pregnant actually experience what's called recurrent miscarriage, which is 3 or more miscarriages in a row, which is really tough when you think about it. I mean, 1 is hard enough, but to have 1 and then another is particularly difficult. So I'm going to go on and tell you about 2 other kinds of pregnancy loss that we deal with in the Miscarriage Association. So one is ectopic pregnancy, and ectopic just means out of place. So it's a pregnancy that's not growing in the main body of the uterus where it ought to be. And those pregnancies can't survive, they can't develop, particularly because most ectopic pregnancies happen in one of the tubes, one of the fallopian tubes. Those tubes can't expand like the uterus or the womb can. So if the pregnancy continues to grow, the tube can burst, and that can be life-threatening because it causes internal bleeding. So ectopic pregnancy is not only the loss of a baby, but it's also usually very frightening, often dealt with as an emergency, and it might also make a difference to future pregnancies, either conceiving or maintaining the pregnancy. So your risk of ectopic is higher once you've had an ectopic. And molar pregnancy is something hardly anybody's ever heard of. It's also called a hydatidiform mole, which nobody can pronounce or spell, much less common. And it just means that there is the wrong kind of, genetic information that starts the pregnancy. It's either far too much or far too little. So the baby can't develop, but the lining of the uterus or womb, which is going to be the placenta, that does develop, and it develops abnormally quickly. And so although the pregnancy doesn't survive, the baby doesn't survive, you need specialist follow-up to make sure that that bizarre pregnancy tissue is dealt with, or just reduces back to normal. It's really not okay to talk about pregnancy and baby loss without mentioning these other kinds of loss during pregnancy. And one is stillbirth or neonatal death. So stillbirth is the death of a baby from 24 weeks onwards. And it's a bit of an artificial divide, because it just is. It's just what the legal definition is. But also, some people have a live birth, but the baby dies, maybe within hours or anything up to 28 days. And that's counted as a live birth, but a neonatal death. So you might hear those expressions. There's another kind of loss, of course, which is through termination of pregnancy. And it, whatever the reason is, that can very often be perceived very strongly as a loss. I think a lot of people think that if a woman chooses, and I put that in inverted commas, to have an abortion, then it's obviously no big deal, and it's not a bother to her. But I think that's really, really not thoughtful, because for a lot of women, that's a very, very horrible decision to have to make, a very difficult decision, and they might even make it under duress. And also, it's important to think about losses that are very, very, very early on. So when you think about people, and Charlotte's going to talk later about her fertility journey, when you think about people who are undergoing IVF, for example, then there may be the point at which there is an embryo transfer. So there is an embryo that's been put into your womb, into your uterus, but then it doesn't actually make it to be a continuing pregnancy, and that's also a loss. So I think just finally to add to that, and as a bit of an introduction to what Charlotte's going to say later, is just to think about aspects of fertility problems. I think most people think that infertility is quite rare, and it really isn't. Around 1 in 6 couples, that's around 3.5 million people in the UK each year, have fertility problems. And that's the way that we describe infertility, is that it's what happens if you don't conceive, if you're having regular intercourse over the course of 12 months. It doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't get pregnant naturally after that. A lot of people do, but that's the point at which you might say there's a fertility problem. And I think also most people think it's a woman's problem. It isn't only a woman's problem. It might be the woman, it might be her partner, and in many cases, it's a combination of both. For a lot of people, there's no obvious explanation or reason as to why they have a fertility problem. And they still may be offered treatment. And sometimes treatment works, and sometimes treatment doesn't work. And in some cases, treatment works, and then there's the joy of the pregnancy, and then there's a miscarriage. So you can imagine there's quite an emotional impact of that too. So I'm going to stop talking there, particularly because Charlotte's going to talk about it later. And what I'd like to do now is to sort of hand over to you, because we're talking about pregnancy loss, and we're going to start by talking about miscarriage. And I think what's most important about it is to think about how it might feel for people. And everyone's different, everyone's unique. But whether you're the woman who's been through the loss, or the person who's been through a loss, if you're not identifying as a woman, or their partner, whether this loss happened quite early on in the pregnancy or later in the pregnancy, whatever kind of a loss it was, I'd like you to think about the kind of feelings that people might have, and to put those feelings, just a word or a phrase, into chat. So we're going to use the chat box, if I can find the chat box, and just pop some words in there that you think kind of reflect the feelings, the different kinds of feelings that different kind of people might have. Okay, I know you can see these. Hopeless, guilt, sadness, empty, failure, lonely, yeah, worry, exclusion, grief, yeah. What other feelings might people have? Yeah, fear, jealousy, yeah, confusion, and a lack of control. We always think, don't we, that we can control our fertility. We're very busy using contraception. And then we think, well, as soon as I stop contraception, A, I'll get pregnant. Doesn't always happen. B, once I'm pregnant, everything's going to be fine. And actually, we don't control as much as we hope. Disappointing others. Yeah. Let's go back up to the top of this list. Hopeless. I think feelings of hopelessness or feelings of loss of hope, which are not quite the same, but I think those are quite common. And also a sense of powerlessness, that there's nothing that you can do to change things, particularly while they're actually happening. And guilt. Somebody's written guilt. And I think for many people, there's a feeling that, you know, perhaps you're disappointing your partner. Perhaps it's your own fault that it happened. It was something you did or you didn't do, or something you ate, or something you thought. You know, could it be that I wasn't really thrilled about being pregnant? And maybe I was even thinking about having an abortion, but actually I did want pregnancy. I decided I wanted the pregnancy, but it must have been that thought that caused me to miscarry. So I think feelings of guilt are quite common. And feelings of sadness and emptiness, and somewhere else, Rachel's written grief, I think are also things that sometimes other people who haven't been through miscarriage don't understand. So they might expect you to be sad for a while. But I don't know, there's something about the British, I don't know what it is about us, but we sort of expect that you can be sad for a short time, but then you really ought to cheer up, have a cup of tea with sugar, and then you're going to feel better. And they don't realize that actually these feelings of loss and emptiness and grief can be powerful, and they can last for quite a long time. They don't always, everyone's different. Feelings of emptiness, sometimes a physical feeling of emptiness. And failure. How is it that everybody I know seems to be getting pregnant at the drop of a hat and having babies all over the chute, and I'm not? Why is it that this woman down the road is, you know, this is a bit like jealousy, isn't it? You know, somebody down the road has got 3 kids and is always yelling at them and is smoking and drinking, and she seems to be having babies okay, and I can't. And it can feel very lonely. It can feel really lonely if you don't talk to other people who've been through something similar, or if the people you talk to don't get it. I think we're going to be talking later about the kind of things that people say and you rather wish they wouldn't. So yes, feelings of exclusion, being worried about what's happening now, and also about what it might mean for the future. And feelings of fear for the same reason. And jealousy. Oh yes, jealousy. We're not supposed to feel jealous, are we? We're just supposed to smile and bear it when other people seem to get pregnant easily and have happy children. But we do. Okay. Does anyone else want to add anything to this? I mean, either speak or plonk it in the chat. Anger. Oh yeah. Yes. And I think that feeling of, why me? I've done everything right. You know, I waited till the right time. I've eaten all the right things. I've cut out all the things I shouldn't do or have. And yet, and how unfair it is. And then sometimes when we're feeling angry, we then decide, who do we blame? So sometimes we blame ourselves. That's the guilt bit. And sometimes we just get angry and blame other people. So it might be your partner because you had a row, or it might be your workplace because you've got too much stress, or it might be, I don't know, the supermarket that sold you food that was way past its sell-by date, or it might be telephone mass. You know, you'll think of reasons why this happened. You might be angry at your doctor. And the one thing that you need to know is that it is hardly ever, ever, ever anybody's fault when you have a miscarriage or an ectopic or a molar pregnancy. If you think about people who are pregnant who desperately don't want to be pregnant, they'll tell you that there's not much you can do that's going to shift a healthy pregnancy. So it's not really anybody's fault. And Charlotte's added fear of the future. What happens if we never have a child? What does that mean for the life we planned? And I think that's absolutely the case, particularly if you have difficulty conceiving. But also if you have miscarriage after miscarriage, and it's also that you might not be able to conceive and carry a baby to term, but it's also that maybe you wonder whether you can put yourself through it again, through the trying, whether you can put yourself through it or your partner through it. And you sometimes have to make that decision to stop trying. That's such a hard decision to make. I think what we should do now is hand over to Shelley. And I'm very, very appreciative, Shelley, that you're going to talk to us and tell us more about your experience of pregnancy loss. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi everybody. Hi. Yeah, so I'm Shelley Williams. I'm a Wish board member. I've been on the board for quite some time. I'm also an associate solicitor with Womble Dickinson. This is a subject that's very close to my heart because it's I've been through miscarriage and loss, and also the difficulties in conceiving. Just talk a little bit about my experiences so far. So I'm I'll be 40 this year. Blimey. So I'll be 40 this year, and I think I was probably about 35 or something like that. I think it was when I first started, 35, maybe 35 and a half, going on to 36, when I first started trying with my partner David, and I hadn't thought about having children prior to meeting him. I met him and everything just was right and fell into place, and we'd sort of started to plan forward. David has a little boy, Harry, who's would be my stepson when we're married, but he's like my stepson, didn't think there'd be any problems. I'd been on sort of contraceptive, different types of contraceptive for a number of years, and as I wasn't planning on getting pregnant, I was always more interested in my horses. I just thought that I'd come off the contraceptive, and it might take a little while, and things, I just expected that things would happen, and it they didn't, and sort of there was a year had passed, the doctor said it's fairly normal because you've been on I've been on the implant for quite a few years, and then I've been on the depot injection, and it could take a little while for the hormones to leave my system and for things to come right, but it's sort of, I think it's sort of a year sort of turned into 18 months, and nothing was happening. So I had to push the doctors to look into it a bit further. I was like, come on, I'm sort of 36 now and need to start looking at this. And I had some blood tests taken, and they all came back fine, and I was quite surprised because I was convinced there was something wrong with me, and then my partner was worrying that there was something wrong with him. He had a semen analysis carried out, and that came back with a very low result, and so they sent him, I think it was sort of 3 months after, for another analysis, and came back again that he had it was sort of more or less down to 0, and it transpired that some medication that he'd been on for health reasons had caused the low count, and so sort of we spoke to the doctors. We had to sort of push them. I remember his doctors weren't helpful at all in terms of what we could do, and my doctor was a lot more helpful, and just seemed to get it really, and he was a male doctor, and he just seemed to get it. He just said, yeah, I understand, you sort of, you're 36, and you're wanting to crack on, so to speak, and so he sort of got the ball rolling, and David joined my doctors, and we'd sort of gone to the doctors and things, and we changed his diet and things like that, and then it still didn't happen. Nothing happened for a year, and I think I was getting myself really stewed up every month. Obviously I was even before my period would have been due, I was, you know, pregnancy test after pregnancy test, just, you know, oh, let's just try. And then I'm thinking, oh, it's, you know, it's too early, let's try again. And, you know, so it's all that emotional roller coaster all the time of, you know, is it going to be this month? Is it going to happen? I feel different this month. You know, you know, my body feels different. I feel different. And I think when I found out actually that I'd fallen on pregnant, I think that month, I think we'd sort of taken a bit of a backseat in terms of trying. I think we'd both sort of you know, gotten sort of tired with the whole process. And I remember going out riding my horse. I was riding a new horse, and the horse was particularly difficult, and it was spinning around and rearing, and I was having to get off and get back on, and, you know, it was a real rigmarole, and I felt really tired, but didn't really think anything of it. Next day we went out to the seaside, was driving back, and I had to get David to drive. I just felt so exhausted, and again didn't put two and two together at that point. And it was a few days after that, I had a little bit of bleeding, and I just thought it was my period messing me around again, and it was, you know, it was due to start, and then realized a week on I didn't have my period. So I took a test, and I just couldn't believe it. I saw the 2 lines, and I was just like, wow. So then I went into the bathroom. I didn't tell David, he was asleep, and I went into the other bathroom and, you know, sort of took another test, and that one was blazing as well. So I just thought, I can't believe this. So I sort of went to him and I said to him, look at this, look what's happened. And he said to me, how's that happened? You know, we weren't even trying this month. And I was like, well, how do you think it happens? But, you know, we had that overjoy of the fact that I'd finally fallen pregnant. And you know, it was one of those, do you tell people, do you not? And because I've got horses and I'm quite physically active on the yard, and I'm always lifting bales and things around, and people were asking me to help them with things, and I'm thinking, oh, should I, you know, be helping? Or and, you know, I told people quite early on, actually, and sometimes I wish I hadn't, because obviously it's that thing of, you know, the disappointment with others, because they look forward to your journey as well. And I stopped riding my horse, which is something I didn't really want to do, but I think we'd spoken about it, and because it had taken us so long to get pregnant, we just didn't want anything to get to hamper that. And I became sort of quite down and a bit depressed, actually, with sort of giving that up, because it was something I'd done from early childhood, and it was sort of my outlet. I was due to have an appointment with the midwife, just you know, a first chat, and I was speaking to her just before I was due to speak to her. It was a couple of days before, I noticed that when I went to the toilet, I had a little bit of blood, a little bit of spotting. So I was on Google, sort of, you know, I'd heard about, you know, spotting during early pregnancy, and so I wasn't completely alarmed to begin with. And I'd had a look on Google, and you know, obviously, lo and behold, saying, you know, it could be quite normal, but to speak to health practitioner. So I got in touch with the appointed midwife, and she said, yeah, it's normal, just carry on. So I just carried on as normal, just, you know, eating as healthy as I could, and taking it easy for me, which wasn't easy anyway. And then I think it was a few, sort of, maybe about a week and a half after that, I had some more bleeding, but it was brighter blood this time, and it was quite a bit heavier, not too heavy, but quite a bit heavier. So I phoned the doctors, and it wasn't the usual doctor I got to speak to, and he said to me, very matter of fact, oh, you're probably having a miscarriage, but there's nothing you can do about it. If it happens, it happens. And I was like, wow. So yeah, he said, oh, well, I suppose I better send you for a scan to the you know, the early pregnancy unit. So phoned my partner. He came home from work, and we went up to Leeds to the hospital. And because it was sort of in the midst of, I think when everything started off with COVID, David wasn't allowed to go into the room with me. So it was really difficult, not just for me, but for him as well. He was just sat outside, obviously worrying, and I was, we were messaging each other. And then they took me through to, and sort of had an early scan, and said, yeah, sort of about seven weeks along, everything's fine. There was a fetal pole, and a little sac, and yeah, everything's fine. There's a heartbeat. We got a little picture of little scan picture, and we just sort of came away, and we were really happy. We were actually saying, because there was a chap that was in the waiting room with David, and David remembers him saying that his partner had gone in, she'd had a miscarriage, and we were just, we just didn't know what David didn't know what to say. We just thought, how awful, and we just felt so lucky that that hadn't happened to us. It was that sense of, you feel a bit guilty at that point. So we went home, and sort of we were telling family everything's fine, just carry on as normal, and yeah. And then a few weeks after that, had a little bit more spotting, but it was very light. I phoned the midwife again. She said, everything's fine. You've got your first sort of your 12-week scan in around a week, so everything will be fine. It's normal. Are you getting yourself stressed? Are you doing enough exercise? And I said, well, look, I've given up riding. And she said, well, why have you done that? And so I explained. She said, oh, just carry on with that. What makes you happy? If your horse is sensible, you've done it all your life. It's not like you're just starting out. So I got on my horse and sort of pottering around, and wasn't anything. I wasn't sort of exerting myself or anything like that. Horse was perfectly behaved, felt a lot better in my mindset. So I thought this must be a great thing. And on and off, I was having this, sort of bitter spotting, and I just had something in my head that just was telling me it just didn't feel normal to me, despite what I was being told. And so we'd gone for the 12-week scan. Obviously, you get told to drink quite a lot of water. And I don't know if anybody's ever been for a kidney scan or an organ scan, and they're having to drink quite a lot of water beforehand, and you obviously have that urging that you need to go into the toilet. But for me, it felt like I was in agony. It felt really, really painful. It didn't just feel like I needed to go to the toilet. It just felt like I was in agony. And I had the scan, the scan, and I knew there was something. I just knew there was something wrong. And again, David couldn't go in with me. He had to wait outside. And the nurse said to me, she said, I just need to do an internal scan because I can't quite get a clear picture. Is that okay? And I said, yeah. So I just knew. And I sort of remember just sort of like looking up at the ceiling and thinking, there's something not right here. And she wasn't showing me the screen. And I'm just thinking, how am I going to tell people, what about David, obviously, and how am I going to tell people? And the nurse then turned to me and just said, I'm so sorry, but there is no heartbeat and your baby's died, and your baby died probably 2 weeks before you came here today for the scan. So yeah, I'd had a miscarriage, and yeah, didn't know anything about it, other than obviously the spotting. I was told it was normal. So I then just all thoughts whizzing through my head. I had to go and tell David, and then obviously tell my parents. And I think at that point, because I'm pretty much like this, and it's not because I've got a harsh or hard exterior, it's just how I deal with things. I tend to deal with things as they happen. I'm quite efficient at dealing with them, and I just said, right, I just need to. So I told David what happened. He was devastated, but obviously was there to support me. I just said, right, I just want to do whatever we need to do, and I want to go home. So I was sent to another area of the hospital, and we were plonked in a room, and we were in this room for the best part of 3/4 of an hour. Nobody came to us. Nobody told us what was happening. Appreciate it was, you know, COVID times, but yeah, just we didn't know what was going on. And so we eventually, I felt quite angry, actually. I did feel really angry. And we eventually flagged somebody down and just said, look, you know, we've been waiting here for 3/4 of an hour, what's happening? We were then taken to another ward, where the nurse went through the fact that I'd had a miscarriage, but the baby hadn't come away, and so she said we'll have to do a procedure. There are 2 different types of procedure. There's the medication way, or there's a, you know, sort of more invasive method. And she said, but we can't do the latter because we haven't got the staff at the moment. So with the medication, the internal medication, which will bring on the, you know, the contractions and cause the loss, or cause the, you know, the pregnancy tissue to, and the baby, well, it was my baby, you know, baby. They said pregnancy tissue, but for me it was our baby to come away. And so I said, right, okay, come on, I just want to get on with this. And she said, oh, no, we can't do it today. You'll have to come back. So I had to go home, and obviously you're telling people. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to do anything. I just didn't know where to put myself. David didn't know where to put himself. And then we went back the next day, and nurse sort of talked me through. Well, she said, you know, basically it'll feel like you're having a heavy period. And I'm sorry if this is upsetting for people, but obviously I'm hoping it helps people for me to share my experience, because, you know, it's not that I don't get upset about it, but I'm just trying to use it as a positive to help other people. But she basically just said, you know, I'm going to have to put these tablets internally, and they'll cause contractions, and you'll get what's like a heavy period, and I'll give you some painkillers, and you know, just be aware, you know, you need to wear pads and things like that. So I went home, and I was just laid in bed sort of watching TV, and then I just felt, you know, like the urge to push, really. And it wasn't just a heavy period. It was quite traumatic, actually. And, you know, obviously David was, you know, it was really hard for him as well, because he didn't, you know, there was nothing he could really do, other than obviously support me like he always has done. But you know, this whole process took quite some time, and I was up, you know, during the night back and forth to the bathroom, and it wasn't just a heavy period. There was a formed embryo, a formed fetus. You know, the baby was nearly, you know, so I think this baby died at 10 weeks or just after 10 weeks, and so it was very visible. And very, very obvious what was coming away from my body. That was, you know, sort of that part of the process. You know, after that, I sort of went in on myself, really, and shut myself off from everybody. I'd say I probably shut myself off from David as well at one point. I felt really guilty. I felt really angry. I just thought, you know, what's happened? Is it because I got back on my horse? But the baby had actually died before I got back on my horse. And I just thought, you know, what's wrong with me? What's happened? Why has this happened? And then I kept getting a real sense of, I was just overwhelmed. I just felt like it was just consuming me. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't concentrate on anything at all. Didn't want to spend time with my horses, which for me is just doesn't happen. And this went on for a number of weeks, to the point where it was summer and the horses were out in the field, and David had said to me, oh, you need to go out because Odin's cut his leg, and you know, nobody else can get near him, and he was a rescue horse. And so I said, right, okay, I'll have to go out and see him. And other people were obviously keeping an eye on him and not just left him in the field. But yeah, so I went out to see him, and he didn't have a cut at all. It was just David's way of saying to me, come on, you need some help here. And I remember the horse that I'd rescued, who was in a state when I got him, and he just took one look at me, and I took one look at him. He knew that something had happened, and he barged through the gate after me and followed me up the yard, as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. And that was it from that point. from that point, he, I think he sort of saved me really from myself, I guess. So that was a massive help. And I just sort of used the horses really and work to move forward, and just to you know, and where I'm at now is that we're still trying, and it's 2 years now since is it 2 years? Hang on. Yeah, be 2 years since I fell on pregnant. So June it'll be coming up to 2 years. So yeah, we've been, you know, obviously went through that process of do you try again, and you know, do we go through this? And then we were saying, well, the people have gone through it, you know, a few times, and we, you know, and I didn't expect it, you know, it would go on, and it would take, you know, it wouldn't happen again. Basically, I thought once it happened once, it would happen again. And you know, it hasn't. And you know, I've had times where it's, you know, it's sort of the whole process is threatened to consume me and you know, take over my life, and I've had to try to, you know, sort of use it as a, you know, not use it as a positive, but I've had to try and be positive and try to move forward with the process. And it is hard at times, but you know, this is why I'm wanting to share my experience, because there is help out there, but you do have to push for it yourself as well, and you do have to help yourselves, and you have to be, you have to remember who you are, and you have to remember, you know, why you're doing this. And you know, it's difficult, but as Charlotte will tell you, you know, I still have the faith that it will happen, and we're just waiting at the moment for an appointment for the fertility clinic in Leeds. And it just shows you how many people go through this, because initially they told us it was 12 weeks wait, then it was 16 weeks, then it was 20, and then it's 30 weeks, and that's the worst case scenario. And I think we've got 5 weeks to go before we get an appointment, or we hope so anyway. So we've both had all the tests, blood tests, semen analysis, and everything's normal. So at the moment it's unexplained. Whether when they do a bit more investigation, they'll see that there might be a blockage somewhere, or you know, something like that. I don't know. But that's where we're at the moment. And for me personally, I've found that, you know, talking about it, sharing ideas on a platform like this, although it's, you know, it's upsetting at times, it's helpful, because you need to go through that process, and you need to not forget about who you are. So I'm doing stuff with my horses. I've got a new job. You know, I've done really well with my new job in the last 6 months, and yeah, it will happen. But you know, it's having that faith that there will be a way forward. So thank you everybody for listening. I'm sorry if that was a bit long-winded.
Shelley, it wasn't long-winded at all, and you have said so much that people will understand. But sharing your feelings in that way is just, I don't want to say it's brave, because I'm not sure brave is the right word. It's part of who you are.
Yeah.
And it also means that from all of the distress, and boy, what a long period of difficulty you've been through, you've taken that and you're also making something positive out of it by sharing it with others and helping them to go through. And I guess one of the things that stands, I mean, there are so many things from what you say that stand out. And I think the first is that so many people have no idea what it takes and what people go through from that innocence of just, hey, let's have a baby.
Yeah.
And then going through the waiting and the testing and the knowing what you might be able to do in terms of David and his health and his diet and his medication. And then that utterly amazing joy of discovering you're pregnant. And then the devastation of the loss. But in between, you also had that period of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because it was okay or it wasn't okay. And there was spotting, which made you very anxious, understandably. And then you had to go through this whole process during COVID when David wasn't allowed in with you.
Yeah. And
being reassured, but the reassurance actually wasn't really appropriate. The point where you knew you needed help and support And who was the person you got your support from most was actually your horse, Odin.
Yeah.
Without words.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because of that closeness and because of a recognition that animals sometimes have, there's something so beautiful about that. I mean, you can ring a helpline.
Yeah.
But it's
There's
just
nothing like that medicine.
You've got a hug from a horse.
Yeah, definitely. And the bond now is just unbreakable. It really is. It's changed us both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how intuitive animals are, isn't it?
You know,
it's
the thoughts about moving forward. You're also in uncertain times.
Yeah.
And I think that just must be incredibly difficult as you inch your way forward. A list for the fertility treatment without knowing for sure what's going to happen when you get there. But you describe also this, I mean, so many things that we just touched on earlier about, do you try again? Don't you try again? And right now, that's where you're heading.
Yeah.
To the trying again.
Yeah, I'm not giving up. It's not over till it's over.
No. You're getting lots of lovely comments in the chat.
I know. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, it's very kind.
I wondered if
I'm glad I could help. Yeah. Yeah.
I wondered if anybody else wanted to say anything, though. I'll shut up.
I could probably say something in that I'm really glad that you sorry, my voice is terrible because I've been so poorly recently.
Oh, bless you, Gemma.
I'm really glad that you shared your story, because that's something that you have gone through there is not something that I have gone through, and so it's actually I'm really pleased that you shared your story in that, getting me to open my eyes to the fact that somebody has gone through that right at the beginning of their pregnancy. My pregnancy story is that my loss was right at the end of my pregnancy, so it's encouraging, and it's nice that we can all share things at different stages with our pregnancy. So thank you. You were so brave, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
How are you, Gemma? Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your loss.
My loss was in labour. I was full term.
Oh.
My son was 5 days overdue. I had what they called a textbook pregnancy. Absolutely nothing was wrong, and he died. He died when I was in labour, and I had to give birth in the normal way, and as you do, and he would have been 13 now. So it's you don't forget the milestones that they start reaching, and things like that. So yes, it's encouraging to hear other people's stories, even if it's not a story that you have actually gone through, but certainly one that you can relate to.
Thank you, Gemma. And as I say, I'm so sorry for your loss. It must have been so difficult, and I think it is just so important that we've got platforms like this where people can talk, because people do feel like they're alone. Maybe they don't feel or want to talk to people that are closest to them, and to talk to people that are a little bit more removed, or just that have been through the similar experiences. Whatever stage, as I think Ruth said at the beginning, whatever stage of the process you have the loss, or however you have the loss, it does evoke massive feelings of loss and grief and all of those things that we shared at the very beginning.
I completely
Thank you, Gemma,
agree.
for sharing your story. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Very brave.
I think this is a brilliant therapy session, so thank you.
If anyone has any other comments, please feel free to use the chat as we kind of go on through the rest of the event. I'd really love to welcome Charlotte next, who will be sharing her experience of her IVF journey with us. Wonderfully, that led to the birth of her 2 daughters. But again, not an easy process, I believe, Charlotte. So if I could hand over to you, that would be great. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Paula. And thank you so much, Shelley, for sharing that. It was absolutely brilliant. And also Gemma as well. So thank you. Before I get started. Yeah, so as Paula said, I'm Charlotte. So I'm 40. I turned 40 last year, and I currently have I've got 2 children, a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. And yeah, I just wanted to share our IVF journey, because for a couple of reasons actually. Before I started IVF, I'll be completely honest, I had no idea what it was, and I just wish that it was more openly talked about, because what I kind of entered into was probably the most difficult and consuming thing physically and mentally that I've ever been through in my kind of 40 years on this planet. And it is one of those things that you just think, God, we're brilliant as women, you know, and actually we just get on with these things, and we do them, and we don't talk about it. And I'm pretty sure if it was men that went through the IVF process, there'd be a lot more chatter about it. But I won't go down that road. I think I'll just start off by kind of explaining why IVF was the best choice for us. So my husband Carl was diagnosed with testicular cancer in his late 20s. So he had his testicle removed, and then about 4 months later, through a screening process, they found that he got secondary cancer in his lymph nodes. So he had quite aggressive chemotherapy, and basically as a result of that, the damage to his body meant that he had to and he has to continue to this day to have testosterone injections, which basically means that his sperm is pretty much non-existent because of the medication that he has to take for his body to function. So before he had his testicle removed, he did have a frozen sperm sample taken. But the quality of that was also quite poor. They're not really sure why. It might have been something to do with the cancer, or it might have just been the way his body was. So I suppose in terms of our choices as a couple, the medical professionals were pretty much, by all means, try and conceive as any couple would, but your chances of doing so are really, really difficult. And we wouldn't go through any of the other steps that you normally would go through in the kind of fertility journey, like artificial insemination, that kind of stuff. We would just fast track you straight to IVF. So all of that happened when Carl was in his late 20s, which is we're around about the same age. And then we tried to conceive naturally for a couple of years, did all the normal stuff that people do when they're trying to conceive, including, tracking ovulation, that kind of stuff. I'm a bit of a control freak, so I'm really into kind of data and numbers and analysis. So for me, I was all, I had the app, I had everything. It was, I was on it. I knew what day I was ovulating. I knew what was going on. I knew when my periods were due. So yeah, that was kind of 2 years, and then we entered into IVF treatment, and we ended up in the IVF treatment cycle for 3.5 years. In terms of the journey, so our choice was pretty much set out for us as IVF. But what I found quite interesting was that they, in the IVF process, they really treat the female, the woman in the relationship. So Carl's bit was kind of already done. He had his frozen sperm, and then everything then sort of diverted onto me. It was led by my GP. Then it was my medical records. All the tests were then on me. So I had blood tests to start off with at the GP at certain points of my cycle to check my hormones. Actually, at that point, it did flag up that I had celiac disease. So when I started the process, one of the checks that they ran at the time for when you were going through the IVF screening process was for celiac, because it can cause infertility. So I was diagnosed with celiac and had to go through all the kind of endoscope biopsies, official diagnosis, and then also had to go through kind of 6-month period before I could then enter IVF treatment, where they got my onto a gluten-free diet, and then my body under control in terms of my blood test results, and then all the usual screenings for BMI, surveys around kind of drinking, smoking, smear tests, then went into secondary care, so into the fertility clinic at the hospital, and did all the kind of scans, dyeing, internal scans, external scans, and I suppose the upshot of it was, at the end of that kind of testing process, is that everything from my end was physically was in full working order. I mean, it's really interesting because when I was reflecting on this, actually, to do this talk, I was about 32 at the time, and I'd never been pregnant. So I'd spent pretty much all of my teenage years in my 20s desperately trying not to get pregnant. And then I was in this weird environment where I was like, oh, right, now, now I'm trying to get pregnant, and I can't, and I'm being told everything's okay, but I still can't get pregnant. And I just found it really, really difficult. I think as a young woman who's been very much used to working hard at something, putting a lot of effort and energy and doing the right thing, and being really ambitious, and doing the right thing, working hard, doing what you're told to do, and getting the end results, to be in a really weird situation where no matter how hard you work at this, and no matter how good you are and how many of the boxes you tick, you still can't do it. And I just found it incredibly difficult. So we entered the IVF process, and I think some of the stuff that Shelley said, actually, around, I just lost who I was. I got to the point where I'd stopped going to the gym, because people were saying to me, oh, you don't want to be underweight, you don't want to over exercise, you don't want to physically exert yourself. I'd stopped drinking alcohol. Don't drink a lot, but I'd just stopped drinking alcohol at all. I'd stopped trying to put myself under stress at work, because again, people were saying, if you just relax, it'll happen. It won't. It'll just, and there was a kind of a definite, you work too hard, you're pushing yourself too hard at work. So I'd sort of not taken a backward step in my career. I was a chief operating officer at the time, but I definitely stopped kind of leaning into my career and stopped putting my hand up for stuff, which just quite frankly made me really sad. Me and my husband, because of IVF, how IVF works, and I'll go into that in a minute, we'd stop planning holidays, but also silly things like committing to doing things with friends, whether it was going to weddings or just going out on a weekend. We just kind of completely stopped doing that, and I think that was because I won't go into too much detail on it, but I'll just explain it a little bit of what is actually involved in IVF. So I went into the process really naive. I'll be honest, I thought it was a form of artificial insemination. I thought it'd be like a bit like a smear. You go in, you'd have some sperm put in there, and something would happen. And in actual fact, what it is, in my opinion, quite a physically demanding process. So in essence, what happens is they supercharge your ovaries. So you've got 2 ovaries, and normally between your 2 ovaries, you'd create 1 egg a month that's then released down your tubes into your womb. And what they do with IVF is they basically ask you to do hormone injections into your legs or your stomach for about 3 weeks, and before you would be due to ovulate. And basically what that does is make your ovaries that normally would produce 1 egg between the 2 of them produce somewhere between 10 and 20 eggs. And then once they get to that stage that those eggs are there, before they kind of pop and go down the fallopian tubes, they do a physical internal extraction of those eggs. and they basically remove them directly from your ovaries, and then they try and fertilize those eggs with your partner's sperm, and then basically they cultivate those eggs into embryos over a 5-day period, and then whichever ones make it to those 5 days and become what they call a blastocyst, which is a kind of the startings of an embryo, or like a development of the embryo, then are deemed as good enough to be transferred back into your body. So they then put you on another form of hormones to prepare your womb, and you can either do that straight after you've had the extraction or within a week, or they kind of let everything settle down for a couple of months, put your precious embryos in the freezer, and then get them get them out, defrost them. I'm sure it's much more technical than this, and then kind of transfer them. So what happened with us was we had one round, which is what I've just described, with the NHS, and that was paid for. And we got 8. So I got 8 eggs. And then they managed to fertilize 4 of them through a process called ICSI, which is the most extreme form of IVF. It's where they basically grab your husband's sperm, or my husband's sperm in this case, and physically put it into the egg, and then that makes an embryo. So of the 4 that they managed to make into an embryo, only 2 made it to sort of day 5, and they transferred 1 back into me, and then the other one wasn't good enough quality for freezing. And when they transferred the embryo back, I got a positive pregnancy test, so I was absolutely over the moon, and then I started bleeding and lost the pregnancy. So we were just absolutely devastated, because I think what happens with all of this is what I've just described would normally just happen in your body without you knowing anything about it, but obviously every point of that process was visible to me. And even to the point that I was getting phone calls every morning on those 5 days of the embryo development, telling me what the progress of my embryos was. So I knew how many I'd had taken out. I knew how many had made it. I knew how many had gone back in. I knew I had no other ones left, and I was going to have to start the process again. And then I had a pregnancy test. I had blood tests, and then it all just stopped because I started bleeding. And a bit like kind of Shelley said, I rang up the clinic who I'd been having kind of daily contact with, and their response was just, you'll be having a miscarriage, there's nothing we can do, we don't need to see you, it just happens. Basically, if you have any complications, ring us back, if not, then sort of don't. I was just devastated, because obviously there was the disappointment for me, there was disappointment for my husband, my hormones were all over the place. I'd had to tell work, so work knew, so they were sort of texting me and asking me in a really supportive way, what the outcome had been. My family knew, my friends knew, and I just felt this kind of overwhelming sense of responsibility to other people, actually, which I know is really, really weird thing to say, but that's just how I felt. I felt like I'd failed in the most visible way, and yeah, it was just really, really tough. So after we'd recovered, we went back to the NHS to discuss kind of next options, and that was the other thing. There was very little follow-up with it. It was just kind of very firmly left in our camp. And then when we went back, we were told quite unceremoniously that basically there was no more treatment that the NHS could offer us for free. Basically that any further treatment, despite our circumstances with the fact that Carl had had cancer and he'd had secondary cancer that had been undiagnosed and missed, basically there was nothing else that they could do for us, and that if we wanted to, we could pay for further treatment, but if we even wanted another consultation, we'd have to pay for that. I just found it really difficult. Some of the things that people put in the chat, but the place that treated fertility is in the same building as the place that treats all the pregnancy and maternity. So I had a really significant case of green-eyed monster. So every time we went to the for treatment or consultation, I was literally surrounded by pregnant people and babies, and I just found the whole thing really, really stressful. Some of the stuff that came up in the comments, why is it me? Why can everyone else have babies? Women smoking while they were pregnant. I just found it really difficult. But also with the NHS, they kind of, when we said, well, would you do anything different with the protocol that you put us on? Would our treatment be different? Because it didn't work that well this time. In terms of the number of eggs that they extracted and then how many embryos we had no options for freezing. Would they do anything different? And they said no, they wouldn't. And I just, again, I think a bit of a control freak, found that really difficult to get my head around. So we started looking at our options, and obviously, because we were having to pay for this, there is the options to look at kind of private clinics as well. So we went and had a couple of consultations with different clinics, and settled on one that we liked and that we felt kind of comfortable with. They were, from my point of view, what I really liked about them was they said that they would do something different. So they would do a different protocol, which they call a long protocol, which is basically they give you, it adds another 3 weeks onto the process. So they basically shut all your hormones down for 3 weeks first with injections, and then they kind of supercharge you in the way that I described before. But what they also said was that they would use a mixture of Carl's fresh and frozen sperm to try and get the best outcomes for us. But it was just a really, really weird thing, because when you've your whole life have been embraced in the bosom of the NHS, to be unceremoniously dumped from in what feels like your biggest time of need just feels really, really weird. And it also, then you kind of go into this private medical setting where even to have a consultation, you're paying like £250 just to see a consultant. And then, your medical bills are, extreme, like eye-watering. So we ended up having 2 full rounds of long protocol, and I think including ICSI, and then having a further 5 embryos transferred with pretty much the same results. So I think the longest time I was pregnant for was about 7 weeks, and then had the loss. And in the end, our total IVF bill, by the time we had conceived my first child, which is Lily, my daughter, was £12,000. Because you have to pay for everything. You pay for the treatment, you pay for the medication, you pay extra for ICSI, you pay for your embryos to be frozen, you pay for progesterone if they put you on progesterone, which they did in the end with me. So it's super, super expensive, on top of being physically really difficult, really painful actually, and your hormones are all over the place, and then obviously psychologically it's just really, really difficult. I often said to my husband, it feels like a treadmill that's on and someone just keeps turning it up and I can't get off it, because it was kind of how far we were willing to go, both in terms of my physical health, monetary output, and also, am I going to be able to get through this and still be a happy, healthy individual? It was just so difficult. And then we conceived Lily, our daughter, and had quite a difficult pregnancy. So the first trimester, a lot of actually what Shelley's just talked about. I had a lot of spotting, I had a lot of bleeding. I was in and out for scans every 2 minutes. We always laugh because with Lily, we've literally got a scan for every single week, for like the first 12 weeks with pictures. And then for her sister Isabella, we've got like 2, one at the 12 week and then the 20 week, and that's kind of it. But laughing aside, it was so, every week that went on, it just became, the stakes became higher. and actually all the way through the pregnancy it was just really, really difficult. And actually what Gemma just talked about, we had a really difficult birth with Lily's, and she nearly died. So she got shoulder dystoxia, so her shoulders got stuck in my pelvis. And I just remember screaming at the consultants when it was happening, just saying, she's an IVF baby, she's an IVF baby. I've waited 3 years for her, you've got to do something. Because I think the trauma of what you go through, and the value that you place on any baby is just incredible. But when you've been through that, it's just I can't explain it. It's just it's so difficult. So I think, I mean, that's our journey, and that's what happened to us. I was quite fortunate in that I didn't really get any bad side effects from the treatment. So I a little bit of quite significant bruising with the needles, just as in like the injections that you have to give yourself. Very, very uncomfortable when they kind of supercharge your ovaries. I can't explain it other than to say it feels like you're carrying two massive bunches of grapes in your body. It's a really weird feeling. But I think by far the side effect that I found the most difficult was just it's just so emotional. And I really resonate with what Shelley said around, I just felt like I'd lost myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. It becomes all consuming. And I'm a really kind person, I'm a really happy person, and I started to become very jealous of people around me, including my friends and family. And I didn't want to be. I wanted to be really, really happy for them, but then I was also so sad for myself. I just found that really difficult, because I just didn't recognise myself in those sort of feelings and behaviours. So yes, I'm really happy to take questions, and I hope that's not been too rambling.
Not at all, Charlotte. Thank you so much. I think anybody that's been through that can resonate with those thoughts and feelings that you just talked about. And what a really challenging process to live through. I'm sure the result of getting you two beautiful girls was made it all worthwhile. Great comments again.
It's just, to call it a journey almost makes it sound trivial. It must have felt like a lifetime every moment. The weeks and the days, and those 5 days when you're waiting for the next morning's results. It's just a huge amount to go through. And I think, again, it's not even that they underestimate, people don't know what it means to go through that process.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's different for everyone. Is in the treatment path can be different. Obviously, some people are really fortunate and conceive first time and have a really healthy pregnancy, and then try and go back and have a second baby and find it really difficult. So what I've painted was just my journey, and I think it's important. I don't want to scare people, because everything is different. I just wish I'd have known a little bit more in advance. I think the other thing that I just found really difficult is that for me, my fertility challenges just impacted every single bit of my life. I felt like it was, I wanted to keep it really segmented and just be like, this is what we're going through, to conceive a baby. But that doesn't affect my friendships, but it did. It doesn't affect my family, but it did. It doesn't affect my career, but it did. And I think work was super supportive, like really supportive, but you've got all these appointments you've got to go to. Quite often, sometimes I was, so emotional, but also so out of kilter with my hormones that I was having to make decisions, and I just don't think I was in the right place to be making decisions. But also there's that really difficult conversation that you're having with work, whereby you're being really open and transparent about the fact that you're trying to have a baby and you're trying to conceive, and then that has implications for how you're viewed in the workplace, and you'll then be going on maternity and stuff, and and also people not wanting to burden you too much with stuff, but then not wanting to treat you differently. It just, I think that's the thing that I'd not really prepared myself for was kind of the fact that it just touched every bit of my life, even though I tried really hard for it not to.
So difficult, it really is.
Shelley and Charlotte, although your stories are different. Inevitably, they're different. There is also much shared. And one of the things that's shared is that joy of pregnancy followed by devastation of loss, where you go through that incredible, down, and then hope, and then conception, even if it's only a matter of days, and then loss. That feels like such a cruel double blow. And I know it's something that a lot of people.
And I think it is exactly as you've described it, Ruth, that emotional roller coaster that even I tried it always going into it. Sometimes I went in and was just like, I'm gonna start this journey with joy and hope, and I'm going to be really positive, and I'm only sending out good vibes into the world, and it's going to work. Yeah. And then other times I went into it just going, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'm not getting my hopes up. It's not going to work. And I tried it both ways, and no way kind of made me feel better. If I'm completely honest. And I remember one of the consultants saying to me, actually, it's like a game of Russian roulette, Charlotte. There is obviously, there's a lot of science behind this, and it's literally incredible that any child is ever created from IVF. I mean, we often quite joke, me and my husband, obviously not in front of my daughter, but when she has a tantrum, that's what you get for 12 grand. But also that she's double defrosted, and you wouldn't even do that to chicken, let alone a child, because literally she obviously, Carl's sperm was frozen, then she was frozen as an embryo, then she was defrosted to see how good she was, if she was going to be selected, then she was refrozen and put back into the freezer, and then defrosted again, and then transferred into me. And the fact that sometimes I look at her and think, wow, like that, like the fact that that's happened is incredible. But what the consultant said is, it's literally Russian roulette. It's, there is science behind it, but all you need is the right sperm, the right egg, the right conditions, and all those things have to align. And I think, as you alluded to, Ruth, it doesn't matter then what you do as a woman. If you ride your horse, or you do something else, or it's those things, but you just the magic has to happen, and it is like a game of Russian roulette. Which I think I wanted to punch him in the nose when he said that to me at the time, because I was just like, that doesn't feel helpful at all. But actually, since I've been through the process, it does make sense what he was trying to say to me.
So one thing that we talked about, Shelley and Charlotte, actually, when we were preparing for this event, was we discussed some of those really insensitive comments and questions from people around you that are just so hard to deal with, especially when you're facing fertility problems or loss. Can you share any of those examples with the group today that you've had to deal with personally?
Yeah, I mean, I've had at least you can get pregnant. I've had, David's got a little boy, and I think, and we love him to pieces, but he's not my child. He is my little boy, but he's not my child. I think people sometimes, they don't know what to say, or that it's sort of well intentioned, but it comes across wrong. Or you get them asking you, what's happening? Nothing's happened, and what's going on? Are you gonna have to get on with it? You're getting older now. What's going on? And I think it's people. It's different people of different ages, but I think sometimes it is people of an older generation, because IVF and all these different processes weren't in the mix, and so it wasn't probably something that they thought about. It was just things just happened, didn't they? I think, and that's the thing. You think things are going to just happen. You decide to have a family, and it's just the natural course of progression. But when you actually think about the statistics, and you look at what it takes for all these millions of sperm that then don't actually make the way to where they need to be for one egg, it's miraculous that we actually we're actually all still moving along and reproducing as we are. So it's just, I think people just don't always, they're well intentioned, but they don't always realize how it's coming across.
If you don't mind me sharing, I think my insensitive point was, and do not get me wrong, I love the NHS. I'm all for the NHS. They're very, very busy people, and I think Charlotte, I think you mentioned that, you know, sort of pregnancy loss or, you know, early pregnancy unit is in the same building as the maternity unit. That in itself is very, very difficult, and I think the one insensitive or you know, thing that perhaps could have been handled differently is when I was going home from the maternity unit without my baby, you know, I'd gone in with my car seat, with everything, with, you know, and I came out empty-handed, that I was still walking out of the same door as everybody who was walking out with their babies. And I remember, you know, somebody passing me through that door saying something along the lines of, well, where's your, you know, where's yours?
Oh,
You know, so something, and I just remember thinking, if only you knew what the last 24 hours has been like. But I think that, you know, perhaps even professional people, unfortunately, we all get treated the same, and all of our journeys and our stories are all completely different. And so yeah, sometimes I think even insensitive things can come from the very top, and it's just really, really unfortunate. So really, really happy for groups like this to come together so that we can actually, you know, discuss it and talk about it and deal with it.
Thank you. Thanks, Gemma. I think it's a great opportunity now just to ask of Ruth one last time, really, how, you know, what support is out there, Ruth? Where can people turn to? I know there's some great resources out there, but it's just a subject that's still so difficult to talk about, isn't it? And through my experiences, I certainly wouldn't have sat in a group or had the opportunity to do this and really understand, you know, what other people are going through.
Emmeline, I think you're going to put that slide up for me. I think for many people, there is support to be had from family and from friends, and there is information to be had from health professionals or charities or whatever. But so often those opportunities are missed, or people try really hard to say the right thing and they end up saying all the wrong things that you've mentioned. And as Gemma said, there are circumstances which are just dire. Not that you want to go out of the back door exactly, Gemma, but you know, really difficult things to be experiencing a stillbirth or to be experiencing a miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy when there's lots and lots of happy people and balloons and things going on around you. So that's really hard. But in any case, I can tell you that there are, I think, three organizations in particular that I would suggest if you want to talk to people who don't say things like, well, never mind, you can always try again, which is, you know, sounds so simple, and what we've heard today is it so isn't. So I've sorry, very selfishly put the Miscarriage Association at the top. So we're a UK-wide charity, and we offer support and information to anyone who's going through miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy or molar pregnancy. And I should say to you in particular, you know, in the north, that we're based in Wakefield in West Yorkshire, which we believe is the centre of the universe. So that's who we are. And yes, the other one is, the second one I think that's most relevant is Fertility Network UK, which is a really, really helpful organisation which offers support and information. Also, there's a lot of campaigning. For example, we're talking a lot to organisations and companies about pregnancy loss in the workplace, and they are campaigning about fertility issues in the workplace, particularly for the reasons that Charlotte mentioned, because of having to take lots of time off, and whether or not, if you talk about your experience, it's actually going to, you know, be negative in terms of your career or whatever. They also have as part of their stable, as it were, a section sort of called More to Life, so that they offer support also for people who are childless, not by choice. And that's worth knowing about wherever you are in your journey. And I've also added the Ectopic Pregnancy Trust because there is sadly such a link sometimes between a ruptured ectopic pregnancy or problems that cause the ectopic pregnancy and fertility problems. They can, whichever one comes first. And they have a great deal of information and support around ectopic pregnancy. So I think use those resources however much you want to. And all of us have websites. If you don't feel like picking up the phone or using live chat, you can go to the website and find lots and lots of information, or you can join Zoom support groups or read other people's stories and feel much, much less alone and much, much more understood.
Thank you. So we're coming to a close, and I just want to say such a massive thank you to all of our speakers today. Ruth, your expertise and guidance has been invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us. Shelley and Charlotte, your courage in telling us your stories has just been outstanding. I could not have done it, so I completely admire the pair of you. And I think if we've helped even one person by sharing your journeys today, then I, for one, feel very grateful for that. So thank you. I hope you found today's session valuable. We'd be really grateful to hear your feedback. I think there's a poll in the chat. If you have 2 minutes just to complete that for us, I'd be really grateful. And you know, any future events that you want us to consider as Wish, then please drop that into the chat too. We'd love to hear from you what you want from us as well. So thank you again from myself and from the rest of the Wish board, and I wish you all a very good rest of day.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ruth.
Take care.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.